Forgot to put my ear mic in here, folks. It's interesting. I guess I'll be planted in the pulpit this morning. It's interesting to consider where we are planted in this life. We are planted in America in the 21st century, just at the time when the, I don't know what you call it, digital revolution is transforming our world, maybe even more significantly than the Industrial Revolution when it came. I was planted as an Anglo or Euro-American with all the rights and privileges accorded to majority status. I've always taken health insurance, access to higher education for granted. Police have always been regarded as a friend to me. I might have been planted in other circumstances where that wouldn't have been the case. I might have been planted as the other gender, maybe as a woman in Afghanistan or sub-Sahara Africa. Might have been planted at another time entirely, maybe in the Arabia Peninsula during the 8th to 13th century, the golden years for Arabia, where culture and economics and sciences flourished, as opposed to Europe, which had been plunged into what we call the Dark Ages after the fall of the Roman Empire. Wouldn't want to have been planted in London during the Dark Ages. They ate garlic, raw garlic, as a snack. And, it wouldn't have been the place for me. Still, being planted in America in this day and age has its own unique challenges. We have a pretty interesting election cycle going on. It seems to be getting a little more bizarre all the time, and an increasingly polarized population, government gridlock where needful things are not getting done. And this is all on top of the bizarre things that go on regularly in our personal lives, in the lives of those that we love. Sometimes we just crave for a little normalcy and a break from these upsets in life. I guess no time or place is perfect. And if it has to be perfect for us to prosper, I guess we're kind of in trouble. The title of our message for today is Bloom Where You Are Planted. It is a message about making the best of a not-so-perfect situation. It was coined by one Francis de Sales, who was a bishop of Geneva in the early 1600s. He was known for his deep faith and his gentle ways at a very polarized time in the world. This is right when the Protestant Reformation was taking place. The Holy Catholic Church, which had reigned, began to crumble in the wake again of the fall of the Roman Empire. And now all of a sudden new churches were sprouting up, new state churches in Switzerland and in England eventually, big Lutheran presence in Germany and so forth, a lot of ferment taking place. He was a calm voice of reason. He coined the title of our message for today, Bloom Where You Are Planted. And we're going to find that there's quite a bit of biblical support for this notion in our text. In particular, this is the text of the letter that the prophet Jeremiah sent from Jerusalem to the surviving elders among the exiles and to the priests, the prophets, and all the other people Nebuchadnezzar had carried into exile from Jerusalem to Babylon. We're kind of picking up where our message left off a couple of weeks ago when I last preached here from the prophet Jeremiah. And just by way of refresher, Jeremiah belonged to God's chosen people at a time when they were becoming prideful, turning away from God. As a prophet, he said that's going to lead to no good. And eventually, because they turned away from God, God could no longer protect them, and the Babylonians came and destroyed their nation, devastated their nation, and in an act of ethnic cleansing, relocated the survivors of that devastation, relocated them to Babylon as a slave race. Now, it took time to accomplish that act of ethnic cleansing. If you think back to World War II, when European Jews were gathered and sent off to the death camps, that didn't happen overnight. They were held in ghettos for a while and finally put in boxcars and shipped off. And it takes a little while, and in those days it did as well. There were several waves of exiled survivors. Jeremiah was among the last ones to be exiled. Other waves had gone before him. Well, he kept in touch with the people through an exchange of correspondence that was maintained. They were a little more inclined to listen to him now that they were being humbled. And as issues arose among his people, they came to him, he would address them in a return letter. And our text for today is one of these letters. He says, "This is what the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel, says to those I carried into exile from Jerusalem to Babylon." That's a very telling statement right there. In the opening statement, the prelude to this letter, it talks about being carried by Nebuchadnezzar to Babylon. But here, it is God who has carried his people from their homeland into exile. And he did it for a reason. He did it because he had a purpose, which was to turn them back to him. If it was pridefulness that had turned them away in the first place, it just makes sense that it would take humility and recognition of their need to turn his people back to him. So that was what his purpose for the exile was. But he also had a plan in addition to his purpose, and his plan was to restore his people eventually back to their homeland. Just like it took time, however, to exile them, it was going to take time to bring them back, 70 years in particular. He continues, "This is what the Lord says. When 70 years are completed for Babylon, I will come to you and fulfill my gracious promise to bring you back to this place. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope in a future." So even though it was God who led his people into exile, even though it was God whose wrath was disciplining his people, it wasn't meant to harm them, it wasn't meant to destroy them. It was meant to help them prosper, to give them hope in a future. Any of us who've had children entrusted to our care as parents know that our job is to fashion and to mold those young lives. And sometimes we do that with positive sanctions. Sometimes it takes negative sanctions when they misbehave. Otherwise, they'll go out and hurt themselves. They'll play in the traffic and willfully disobey us. Maybe play with a loaded firearm. Can't let them do that. If we catch them disobeying us, then we have to punish them, not to diminish or destroy them, but to train them for their own good. And it takes a little time for discipline to take its effect. When I was a kid, my mom sent me to a corner. She didn't send me to the corner for 3 seconds. I'd have gone, "Yeah, sure, no, not a problem." No, she sent me for 30 minutes, gave me time to think about things. And all during that time, I'd be going, "Mom, can I come back into the land of the living yet?" And, "No, you haven't had time to think about things yet." Well, there were people that wanted the exile to end right away. It was less than what they had left behind, that's for sure. They wanted to go home, and there were false prophets who knew this, and there are always false prophets who tell people what their itchy ears want to hear, usually for a price. And they said, "Yeah, don't unpack your bags. The Lord's going to lead us back here any time now." This news got back to Jeremiah in Jerusalem, and he pens this letter to address that. He says to them, as opposed to don't, unpack your bags, no, he says, "Build houses and settle down, plant gardens and eat what they produce. Marry and have sons and daughters. Find wives for your sons and give your daughters in marriage so that they too may have sons and daughters. Increase in number there. Do not decrease. Also, seek the peace and prosperity of the city to which I have carried you into exile. Pray for the Lord for it. because if it prospers, you too will prosper. Now, once again, God is reminding his people that it was he who sent them into exile. And again, the discipline is going to take time to do its work. Therefore, they should just settle down, calm down, settle in, build houses, plant gardens, have kids, and so forth. It may not be as good as the life that you left behind. It may be less than perfect, but there is potential here. God's going to open doors of opportunities. Seek the prosperity of the land to which he is sending you, because if it prospers, you too will prosper. Even in less than perfect situations, there is an opportunity for you to prosper. You know, recently our congregation, a couple weeks ago, hosted the Ohio Fellowship of Community Churches. There are other community churches like ours in Ohio. They get together in the fall and in the spring. This year we hosted that gathering. Sometimes we get together with the Michigan churches too. But their featured speaker this year was a gentleman named Brandon Krotowski, who is the founder of Edwin's Restaurant in Cleveland. Edwin's, Nancy and I have been there. It is a fine French restaurant that excels in everything from food preparation to service. From the moment you walk into the door, you're greeted very professionally, led to a table, white tablecloth, perfect table settings, uniform. The food's cooked to perfection. The wine list is stellar. Everything about it is great. The employees have received intensive training, and all the employees are previously convicted of felony offenses. All of them have served time. Even Brandon, who served time, was incarcerated in Detroit, Michigan. The mission statement of the Edwins, which stands for Education Wins, reads as follows: to instill leadership skills in formerly incarcerated men and women through an education in culinary arts, providing our community with tomorrow's leaders. And many of their graduates, there are 55 former convicts who are employed at any given time at Edwin's. Many of them are now chefs at the finer restaurants and service personnel at the finest establishments in Cleveland and beyond. And now all of this, of course, has occurred outside of our criminal justice system, which is woefully inadequate in many ways. Here in the land of the free, where we incarcerate a greater percentage of our population than any other country on the face of the earth. We don't have facts for North Korea, but we're fairly certain that it includes them as well. Interestingly enough, fiscal conservatives now are beginning to realize that warehousing the mentally ill, as we do now in our prison systems, is very expensive. A big part of our budget goes to criminal justice, incarcerating people, and we're realizing that we would spend literally pennies on the dollar for treatment that has a very high success rate for the mentally ill, just as an example. But with all these institutional and systemic situations, it's so hard. If you're a felon, you try to rent a place. It's boilerplate. It's in all the things. Ask you that question. To get a place to live, to get employment somewhere, to make a life. With all these institutional impediments, one has to be amazed that anyone could emerge from that prospering, blooming where they have been planted. How? Made mistakes maybe, but to suffer under those circumstances, but they're able to make something because of people like St. Brandon. You think about a young girl who finds herself pregnant in high school, out of wedlock, before she graduates. How do you make a life? How do you get a job that pays a decent wage to support a child? How do you do that without the support of a family or a church family? A young man or young woman goes off to war, sees things nobody should see, comes back with post-traumatic stress disorder, with issues, but finds, even outside of the system, a ministry like one that's offered at the Congregational Church in Talmadge, and one that was founded by a friend of mine from seminary, John Schloop. He founded Warrior's Journey Home, that reintegrates people who are struggling with the issues of having seen things no person should have to see. If people can come through out-of-wedlock pregnancies in high school and post-traumatic stress disorder and being incarcerated, having mental health disorders, not to mention recovering alcoholics or drug addicts, if there are people who are walking, talking victories, who come through that, who find a way to bloom where they are planted, don't you suppose that the rest of us could find a way to do that in our admittedly imperfect lives, but with the challenges that we are facing? It has been part of my experience as a pastor to go through some traumatic circumstances with people and to watch how it plays out in life. Some people who have traumatically lost their jobs, who got up in the morning, went to work having no idea it was their last day. And they meet a security person who escorts them to their desk, watches them while they take their possessions, put them in a box. The humility of walking out the door past former colleagues now and subordinates, carrying your box of belongings as you go. The shock in the aftermath of meaning and purpose issues. How are we going to get by? Having gone through that with people in a counseling role. And to find that when it eventually plays out, I would say more often than not, report that what happened was probably the best thing that could have possibly happened for them. They may not have settled in a job that was quite as lucrative, but maybe the pace of life was affecting them and their family and their personal choices. They needed to step back from it. They had a job with a much better pace. Or one guy, he got fired from a rather high-level position. He called when I was a pastor at Milwaukee, drunk every night. Then all of a sudden he called one time, he's stone cold sober, and he said he was fired and got rehired by the same company, and he was making more than he made before. So you never know how life's going to work out, how it's going to play out. But sometimes, we look back on those devastating things, we say, even the exiles that we go through, we find some things to like about them. I think it challenges all of us then to find a way to bloom where we're planted in less than perfect circumstances, to settle down, maybe grow a garden. That's specifically mentioned in our text. And I bring that up only because right now my garden has a lot of green tomatoes in it because of the wet spring. They went in late, and got a lot of red tomatoes, made canned tomato sauce and salsa, but a lot of green tomatoes out there. It seems like such a waste. But you know what I did? I went out yesterday and brought them in, washed them off, sliced them up, put them in the dehydrator. I'm going to go home and get the little crispy things and put them in a grinder and make green tomato powder. And if you go online, you can find all kind of things you can do with red tomato powder. Nothing online, YouTube, anywhere about green tomato powder. I'm going to take that powder and I'm going to add some powdered garlic and onion and cilantro and a few other little things, a pepper seed, spice it up. I'm going to then add a little bit of boiling water to reconstitute it the right consistency to make salsa verde to put in my big fat burrito. And if it works, next year I'm going to make my own YouTube video and my own original contribution to the store of knowledge in the world. God, when we bloom where we are planted, and if you bloom the fruit is going to follow, right? Got big pumpkin blooms, and eventually a pumpkin comes out. If we bloom where we're planted and produce good fruit, God is never going to let that go to waste. God probably find an original way to make a masterpiece out of you and me. And speaking of gardens, Mary of Magdala went to find the crucified Christ at a grave that was in a garden. And she talked to a gentleman she thought was the gardener. It turned out to be the risen Christ. There's a song about that. And I want to invite you to rise and sing it as we consider how to bloom where we are planted. Please rise.